An initiative of the Greater Des Moines Partnership formed in 2007, the Business Innovation Zone, the BIZ, exists to connect entrepreneurial needs with qualified resources and to provide guided professional and business direction. The BIZ helps entrepreneurs maximize their successes by helping them navigate resources, strengthen knowledge, improve skills, form strategic alliances, and secure proper capitalization. To find out more about the BIZ, visit www.bizci.org.
Introduce Casey Neiman. Casey and I actually met here in Des Moines in a totally different context. Casey was on the board of the Technology Association of Iowa, and at the time was working for Microsoft. So I met him as a corporate guy on a board, and I was the non-corporate guy, even though I used to be a corporate guy. So that's how we met. And he's had a little bit of a change of direction over the years. So if you would just start off, before you get into what you're doing these days, give us your background. How did you get started? And you grew up on a farm. Start there.
Right. So this is when I feel like I'm on the psychiatrist's couch and I walk you through my midlife crisis here.
There you go.
What you want to call it. First off, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. It's great to see some friends and familiar faces. As Mike said, my name's Casey Neiman. I grew up on a farm in Kansas, in the northeast part of Kansas, so it actually looks a little more like Iowa, but the dirt's not quite as good as it is here. Went to school at Kansas State University in the ag college with intentions of always kind of staying in the agriculture space. I worked for what is now Syngenta. They're one of the big ag biotech firms for a few years, and they're in Kansas and Nebraska. And then bumped into a gentleman who happened to work at Microsoft and said that they were going to start putting real live people out in the field. This was back in 2000, and said, we would like some kind of farm boy work ethic to build out our field offices. So I started with Microsoft in Lincoln, Nebraska in 2000, and then shortly after that moved to Des Moines in 2001. And my wife and I have been here for now 12 years and opened the Microsoft office here, and was fortunate to have 14 great years at Microsoft and got an opportunity to do a lot of really interesting things. And also, that was, like Mike said, I got to know a lot of people in the community through TAI and other types of things while I was there. And then about a year ago, I left Microsoft to pursue a startup, and I'm the founder of AgriSync, and we're building a customer service platform for farmers and their trusted advisors. If you haven't maybe heard, there's a lot of technology coming to the farm, and just like the rest of us, when we got kind of inundated with technology, eventually we needed help with that. And so our bet is that farmers will need help with that as well. And so we are building the first mobile customer service platform for the agriculture space, and we're excited to be doing that here in Iowa. So that's the high-level snippet of my kind of work career. I've got 3 little kids, wonderful wife. We live in Waukee. We love Iowa. We're here for the long term, if you will. And the community to us has been great. So happy to be here today to share some of our experiences.
I'm glad to have you. I will just, as a segue real quick, if those of you who are not aware of TAI, that is probably one of the better networking groups around long-term for getting into business-to-business, IT-related in all facets and forms, not always traditional IT. And it's a big organization. It's statewide. They have a lot of fun programs, everything from working with high schools, with tech clubs, through doing legislative things. So I would encourage you to look at it. So, AgriSync. How did you come to the problem? You've identified a problem, and I know quite a bit about it. It's a legitimate problem, but how did it come to you? How did that appear on your horizon?
A little trial and error, but also a little motivation from what we saw happening in other industries. So, having grown up on a farm, I still, my dad and my uncles still farm, and so I have a lot of interaction with farmers. And I would always say, hey, aren't you excited about all the cool technology coming to the farm? You got telematics that'll drive your tractor, you've got mapping solutions, you've got recommendations engines that'll tell you, your seed, your fertilizer rate, all these good things. A lot of farmers are excited about that, right? Because that's sort of the next big bet in production, but they're also a little frustrated with the technology because it doesn't always work perfectly. Just the same way we would all be somewhat frustrated when, when your computer or something else doesn't work properly. And so, when I was talking with the growers, they said, this is great, but I feel like I'm scratching the surface of the potential of the technology. And a lot of times, when I use something and use it really well, it's because I've got a advisor, some agronomist or a precision ag specialist or somebody at the John Deere dealer or somebody at a co-op that has helped me kind of get over the hump with that. The challenge is, getting access to those resources. There's a limited few. They're typically miles away from the farm, and so I started thinking about what's happening with telemedicine. I started thinking about what's happening just in general with the fact that more and more farmers are carrying smartphones. And our thought was, what if we could take the concept and give a farmer on their smartphone a simple application that would kind of take the help desk attributes of a Zendesk and marry that with a video support experience similar to Skype, and then give them the ability to have kind of a network of subject matter to help them from all different companies similar to a LinkedIn. And so that was sort of our vision for what we were doing with AgriSync, and took that idea to a few trusted advisors, people who were already in the ag technology space, and said, hey, does this idea hold water? Does it have promise? And got some good feedback on it. And I will say that I had a few other ideas too, and I was fortunate to have friends who told me straight up on some of those other ideas, hey, that's not a very good idea. Look for those people, right? Those honest people who will look you in the eye and say, it might sound interesting, but I don't know that you're really tackling a problem there. And I know I've heard other folks in Iowa say this before, but one of our biggest challenges is that we're all so nice to each other that it's hard to find people who will actually say, hey, your idea stinks, especially if they're a good friend. And so I was fortunate to have a gentleman who was already in the ag tech space, and he would regularly shoot down some of my other ideas. And in hindsight, what a blessing, right, to have a person like that who cared enough about me to say, I don't know if you want to go there. Because we had another idea that we didn't pursue around the drones and the FAA, right? We've all seen the different things. And I had a good friend of mine, he goes, I've done some business where my primary customer was the federal government before. And he goes, are you sure you want to do that? Because he said, they could delay, they could sit and think about this, and they could bleed you dry as a startup.
Especially right now when they can't make any decisions.
And he said, just really think hard about that. Do you want your biggest and primary customer to be the federal government? I went home and I thought, he's got a point. And I left that one, and I'm really, really glad I did. Now, that doesn't mean that, someday there might be, it might be worthwhile, but, there's a lot of wisdom from people who have done some of these things before, and I was fortunate to have some folks who kind of pointed me on some things that were good and
You
bad.
said something that I found really fascinating when we first started talking about this is, to me, as a technology guy, smartphones are over. That's been around for 5, 6, 7, 8 years as a technology. It's just now fully adopted. And so you think about, kind of just assume they're completely rolled out in one regard, but then in another regard you're thinking, as I asked you, really broadband on a farm? Is there coverage? Do farmers have phones? I'm thinking about when my dad was farming, he didn't carry a cell phone at all, let alone a smartphone. But tell us, you did some research on this.
And I because we had a lot of people who were outside of ag who would look at us and say, do you think farmers will really do that? And there's still a bet out there that they will, right? Because we're just getting ready to launch. But I think a lot of us outside of ag underestimate how tech savvy and how complex it is to be a farmer and how many different things they have to manage. And I think that you would find most farmers on average are well above the curve when it comes to not only technology adoption, but just their ability to consume it. And so we did some market research. USDA had some research out there that said, about 58% of growers have smartphones. We did some university research, and in our university research, it was higher. It was about 90%. And we asked them about what kind of applications they were using, and we dug into connectivity, and you'd be glad to know that in the state of Iowa, 92% of us have access to 4G coverage, which is pretty awesome. We still have areas that don't, and I think that'll continue to get better. But the sort of foundation of what we're doing with smartphones is that a broad set of folks have access to them. And so we wanted to make sure that we had done a little bit of market research. But I think on average, in our discussions with farmers and the people who support them, there's a really high degree of tech savviness amongst them. So, and I think, when we're in a metro environment, sometimes we don't give that as much credence as we should.
So it turned out there was very good coverage. There was an extremely high penetration of smartphones. So you build this app, I know it's more than the app, but you build this app, you get the farmers to use it, I think you give it to them for
Sure.
free. Who's going to be on the other end, and how do you build that? I mean, that's where you make the money,
Yeah,
is on the other
right.
end.
So
talk a little bit about how you provide those subject matter experts and who they are and how that all works.
Yeah, so we give away our application for free to farmers, our basic service, and then essentially advisors, people who support them, who work for a co-op or an agronomy specialist or an ag equipment dealership, they pay a service to use AgriSync. And when we went out and talked to the service providers, and we were fortunate to get some of them in a beta in the fall to test that out, their big issue was cost of service, right? It used to be, we had the CFO for Hagee say, hey, when we send a truck out to the farm, it cost us $500 and on average takes about 2.5 hours, and a remote mobile support would dramatically reduce that cost of service. Now they're still going to have field trucks that go out to the farm, if an axle's broken or something, but more and more when they send people out to the farm, it's a technology issue. And if they could walk that grower through resetting their monitor or some sort of 3 or 4 button thing and see what the grower sees in real time, they could resolve it remotely in 10 minutes and save a lot of money. And that's kind of our value proposition to those advisors. So, for farmers, our value prop is that, they can reduce downtime because they're going to have one-touch access to subject matter experts who might otherwise be miles away and people they have to wait for. And then for advisors, our goal is to allow them to support, more people more often for less dollars. We still want those people to go out to the farm gate and help a farmer. And today, after a nice rain, is a great day to go see a farmer. In 2 weeks, when they're trying to plant and they would rather you resolve the issue in 10 minutes, that's a great time for kind of a remote support tool. And again, what we're doing with our application is not a lot different than some of the macro trends we see in telemedicine or some of the macro trends we see in just servicing in general. But we felt like, both myself and my partner, we had farm backgrounds. We understood kind of the industry vertical, and I think that matters a lot if you're going to build a software as a service application.
So talk a little bit about, you call it like a help desk, but it's not a help desk because the people helping, the advisors, aren't a crew of people in little cubicles.
Correct.
Taking phone calls off the phone. These are the people out in the truck. So if I'm
Right.
a repair person for Hagee, I could be sitting at the local co-op in between physical visits and pull my phone out and help a farmer 30 miles away, right?
Right, and part of this, when I was, in a previous life, we would, at Microsoft, always try to go sell technology to help desk centers, right? Because anytime we walked into a room and there were 500 people pounding away at a computer, we thought, oh, they could use an upgrade or a new tech, But there are cost centers. So traditional sort of help centers are, pools of people. Those are all cost centers in business. And it's hard to sell innovation into a cost center in any business. But if you look at the people that we're targeting the mobile service provider who's probably out there selling equipment, fertilizer, seed, chemical. He's a profit center. He or she is a profit center for that provider. And what we want to do is make that profit center a little more efficient, a little more accountable, the ability to see what that profit center is doing every day. And that's a whole different conversation to have with an organization when you're helping their profit center, hopefully grow from a margin perspective. So our focus is on that mobile field advisor. And I think just in general, it's hard to, understanding that was key. We took our beta to 5 different companies, and 4 of them had these mobile field advisors, and they all said, yep, that looks good, sign us up. The 5th one had this pod of people in a centralized call center, and they were like, I'm not sure if we get this. And we got it right away. We said, this isn't our core customer. And so them telling us no was probably more valuable than the other 4 telling us yes. And I think early on, finding out who your customer isn't is a pretty valuable exercise for anybody to go through.
So talk a little bit more about, you've got one farmer with a single application. She or he can talk to as many advisors as they want.
Right.
What happens if the advisor's not there?
Yeah, so we essentially have the ability for advisors to set backups to each other, but our goal was to, and one of our big value props to farmers was they could have a single application and engage with all the people they had on speed dial today. So the guy from the co-op, the guy from the John Deere dealer, the guy from their independent agronomist. And so that's where kind of the network effect comes in. LinkedIn would be a pretty useless tool if you could only connect with people that were in your own company, right? And so we kind of learned from that and said, for us to really give the grower a broad level of support, we want them to be able to engage with as many advisors as they do. And we do everything kind of on a flat fee type model. So unlike most things in the ag space, we're not a per acre type deal, which is, we hope will also be good.
But if nobody's there, can the farmer record something? I mean, what
Yeah,
happens
we do have the ability for a person to leave an offline message, and that was one of the things we learned in our beta, was that, hey, there's not always good connectivity, and so the ability to leave offline messages is something that we baked into the final release.
So your strategy isn't to go after John Deere. Tell us
Not at all.
Who are you going after first? Who's give us some idea of some typical customers for the next year.
Yeah, so, and I would encourage anybody, it's hard to, you don't want to go after like a big gorilla like Deere, DuPont, who I have a ton of respect for, and they're doing some of the heavy lifting around, bioinformatics, telematics, some of the things that take big R&D budgets, and we're fortunate to have those types of companies in our state, right, that are doing those heavy lifting things. Our model is to tackle the service tier. So kind of the people who sell their equipment or the people who sell their seed, the people who are on the front line service advisors. And again, typically our advisors come from, your local co-op, your precision ag firm, your ag equipment company. We've got some folks that are in the risk and claims adjustment space who like the notion of visual support as well.
So what made you leave Microsoft and do a startup? Why?
This was the question I think my wife and kids also asked me, right? They're saying, Dad, come on, 14 years, it's a great company. No, you're not even going to hang around for the new Xbox. I mean, so,
Did they get free Xboxes because you were?
Well, we definitely got a good deal on games. So, the big loser in all this is my 12-year-old son because he's still on the old Xbox now. First off, I had a great experience at Microsoft. I loved it. Great people. They invested heavily in me. They taught me a lot. And so I wasn't running away from something, but instead I wanted to run to something, and that was this desire that I had at 40 years old to say, could I start and build my own business? And, I think it's important when you go through that to really ask what your motivation is for making a change. Because I certainly had a lot of people who said, why would you leave the comforts of, a nice, secure, good job at Microsoft to basically, move into your basement and try to work on a startup in the sexy world of agriculture support? But I wanted to solve some problems and force a level of, accountability on myself and just to ask if I could do it, right? I also saw that, the last job I did at Microsoft was cloud computing. And I saw that this trend of cloud computing was leveling the playing field for a lot of entrepreneurs. And essentially it was saying, hey, you now have access to a tier of technology that used to be reserved for the big companies. So if I'm back there and I'm in the insurance accelerator, with cloud computing, you guys have access to tools and technologies that used to only be reserved for the mass mutuals and the principal financial groups and all of those. And this opens the floodgates, I think, for a lot of people to say, is there a problem that I can solve from an entrepreneur, especially in the technology space? And so for me, I also was looking at it and saying, if I don't start taking some risk at 40, I've only got so many at-bats left that I can recover from, right? I think a lot of times, and I'm envious of those of you that are in here that are, 25 or 30, your opportunity cost of taking the leap into entrepreneurship is a lot lower than when you've got, a wife, a kids, a mortgage, all those other things. And so, I like to think that I had planned it, that I was thoughtful about it. It wasn't just some sort of overnight thing. I thought about it for several years, and a couple of my friends in here would attest to that I constantly thought about what that would look like. But I think for me it was wanting to have the opportunity to solve some problems that I knew that I was passionate about. Growing up on a farm, I understood what some of these things were. I also thought, we're in a great community here in Iowa if you're wanting to do anything in technology, but certainly if you're interested in agriculture and high-tech manufacturing, you couldn't land in a better place with a more supportive community. So I kind of felt like things were lining up, that it was a good time for me to take that risk. Was also very fortunate to have a supportive wife who said, yeah, I want you to take that risk, because I don't want to, wake up someday to some grumpy old man who's sitting there going, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. And, I'm thankful that not only was she supportive in that way, but she said, hey, I'll go back to work. I'll help support during this transition. So I was fortunate to not only have that, but have a good support network in general. And I think if you're going to make any type of career change, whether it's in entrepreneurship or something else, checking around you to say, do I have some people who are going to lift me up when things are rough? Because I can tell you, it's not all roses. Not all of us are sitting on a Twitter or a Dwala, or, there's good but yet smaller ideas out there that need to be solved. And there's going to be high days and low days. And I think you want to make sure you've kind of checked your team around you, spouse, kids, close friends, and made sure that you've got that good support network.
So we're going to open up the questions here in just a minute, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask. The last thing I was going to ask you about, unless there's no other questions out here, but you've gone through a paid beta. People actually paid you.
Yeah, crazy.
Which you got paid for it. For all those who are giving away your free betas, stop it. Get paid. It was a great way to find out if they were for real.
Right.
And they also some investment in making it work that way.
Sure.
So you had 4 beta customers.
We did.
And are those betas still running, first of all?
No, we stopped the betas after the harvest season. So.
And you are now finishing up dev on a new release. What's your plan? What's the next 4 months look like?
Yeah, so we're set to release here this next month, and it'll be a broad-based release that anybody will be able to get on their smartphone. We did go through a paid beta process, and I'm thankful for those first 4 customers who were not only willing to pay us, but because they paid us, I think gave us much more credible feedback on what they wanted and what they just gave us a ton of customer-driven development opportunities. So yeah, we're planning to launch here in the next few weeks, and it'll be, again, broadly available to farmers for free. Farmers will be able to invite their advisors. Advisors can also invite farmers. And we really hope that we're fixing this gap of support, because we see a ton of potential that the bigger companies and other companies are doing with data and telematics and seed genetics and all these other great things that are happening in the ag space, which we hope will grow food production, which allows all of us in the United States to have the least expensive, secure food supply in the world, which hopefully allows you to go do other interesting things. We're not all waking up every day wondering where our next meal is, and we've got the American farmer largely to thank for that. Now, there are people around the world who don't have that luxury, who are also dependent upon the American farmer to get more and more productive. And we see that this technology revolution is going to help that a ton. We just want to be a cog in that wheel that essentially allows farmers to really maximize the capabilities of that technology. And so
one of those new technologies is another use for your app.
Potentially, yeah.
Right.
So,
Questions?
yes.
2 questions, both ag related. I have some folks that do tractor telemetry.
Mm-hmm.
Different contacts. They are vendors to farmers, like those who
Right.
are small and large farms and sell to them. tie together the dots?
How do you
There's
tie
a
into
lot of
telemetry?
maybe it's not working, the tractor's stuck in the field, something.
You bet. Yeah, so the question was telemetry, which is kind of this notion of guidance inside of tractors and ag equipment that's been around now for a while, but a number of different players provide, if you will, guidance. So, last weekend I was with my father-in-law and his tractor, and we push a button and the tractor lines up just perfectly, and then we take our hands off the wheel, and essentially the tractor drives itself. We get to the end, we turn around. That's kind of the notion of telemetry, and it makes for beautiful straight fields that you can do a lot of other interesting things with. And it's very much what I would call the data side of what's happening in technology. We're essentially just bringing the human element to that, and what we're saying is, if that monitor that I set to guide my tractor throws an error and I can't figure out how to reset it, and I know that the guy who sold it to me or the guy who services that would probably be able to help me reset that, I essentially can use AgriSync as a way to get that person to see what I'm looking at in real time and tell me, hey, push this button, and you'll be back up and running.
So I would put those in touch with you in terms of getting monitored on the platform as part of a maybe getting a call list for that.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then the second question is philosophical. So China is, of course, manufacturing. Obviously, there are socioeconomic strategy implications for farming. We're the world's food basket. How do you see, what are your thoughts on the interplay there of the strategic level?
Yeah, no, I was fortunate. I went to the Iowa MBA program, and we did our international trip to China just a few years ago, and it was fascinating. If you ever get a chance to go, it's an eye-opening experience. And I can remember, looking and seeing all the masses of people and thinking, the American farmer is going to be employed for a long time to come because they're so dependent upon us for food production. There's just not the land quality there that needs to be. So I think in general, especially here in Iowa, we should look at the opportunity in China to, from a food and production standpoint, and be very eager to help them with that. That being said, there are other parts of the world who need to also increase food production besides the United States to be effective. I've got a good friend who's a dairy scientist, and he spends most of his time in China trying to help them develop a secure and safe milk supply. And he's in demand, right? Because they've had issues in China before with safe and secure milk supply. And so he's trying to take some of the best expertise we have in the United States and consult for them in China. And I think we have a good opportunity here. The best knowledge in production agriculture and agronomy in a lot of these areas is not only here in the United States, but a lot of it's here in Iowa. And so Iowa State University was one of our beta participants, their field agronomy team, and they're saying, hey, we get a lot of requests that are not, in Iowa. They're from other places around the world. How can you help us offer advice globally? Well, a solution like what we're doing really opens the door to do that. And so where that goes, I don't know, but I think to your point, there's a lot of expertise that we have here, and a lot of what we're doing is just making people with skilled expertise more available, whether it's to a farmer that's 20 miles away or somebody in another country potentially someday. We think that knowledge transfer, that human interaction is really, really key. So when we think translation and some other tools that we can do with technology maybe more efficiently than alternatives might be interesting as well. Sure, yep. And I think here in Iowa we've got some good telemedicine companies too that are doing innovative things in a very similar way, but again on the health side. So.
Could you give us some examples of cloud computing that you're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So.
What are the pieces and parts?
Yeah. So the question was, give us some examples of cloud computing and that we're using at AgriSync or maybe in general. So we are using the Microsoft Cloud to deliver our platform. It's Azure, yes. So we are completely built on Microsoft Azure, and it's been fantastic for us. I would also say I was familiar with it. The team that's building our product, we were all familiar with it. Because I worked there, and a couple of the guys that are on our team also worked at Microsoft, and that was the primary driver. when you get, I will say I was very biased on all technology for 14 years, and then after I left I got very practical and said, okay, it's not just about the bells and whistles of the technology, it's about having a team of people who can make those bells and whistles work and work well. And that should always be your biggest driver in any type of technology selection. But in general, the cloud has given us the ability to experiment. It's given us the ability to fail quickly and on a regular basis, which you want as a startup, right? You want to be able to take risks that a big company won't. And it's given us the ability to scale in ways that you wouldn't otherwise have to do. So we don't feel like the cloud kind of says, hey, all that infrastructure stuff, we don't want to be world class in that. We want somebody else to be world class in that and for us to be really good at our application. And I think, again, this is where it levels the playing field for the entrepreneurship. You can have a couple of guys that are in the insurance incubator who have a brilliant idea for an application, and they don't have to know how to provision a server or anything like that. Now they just turn that on and off. And to me, whether I'm talking about Microsoft's cloud or Amazon or Google or any of the other providers out there, that just opens the door for a ton of innovation to live in places other than big companies.
Brian?
As a non-technical founder or co-founder, talk about how you found your tech team, your interaction with them, how do you keep product focused, milestones?
Yep.
So the development
Yeah.
side.
It's a great question because the question was, as a non-technical founder, how did you build your development team and other things? And I don't write code, right? But I also spent 14 years around people who were pretty tech savvy. So that was sort of the air we breathed and the water we drank at Microsoft. And so the first thing I did was I went and found a couple of folks who I'd worked with for several years that did write code and did do some of those things. And I'd seen their work while we worked together at Microsoft and said, hey, I want to build this. Can you help me with the MVP and then other types of things? I think that selling a concept of agile computing and continuous integration and how to do things is so much easier than actually executing on it as a founder. When I talk to my friends that are at Microsoft, I'm like, we had it so easy. We just had to go up and make it look good on a whiteboard and a PowerPoint. But when you're in the trench of actually doing that, it's hard and it's humbling and it doesn't always work perfectly. And so I think, to Brian's point, it hasn't been super easy. There are a lot of days where I'm like, if I could just spin that code myself. And that's why I tell my 12-year-old son, stop playing the game, learn how to code the game.
Build the game.
And we've got to tell that to all of our kids because we've got this huge gap, right, in skill sets. And I certainly see it as a founder where I'm like, we've had a great relationship with Iowa State University. We've had some really talented interns work with us. And I'm just so envious of the talent that these young students have to be able to build things. And we need more of that. So I did though go out and find a person who was really good at project management and was also, had a farm background and was pretty passionate about what we were doing and said, help me, put some governance into this product development process. And knowing your blind spots and what you're not good at is so important as a founder. And, I used to have a short list of things that I didn't have figured out. Now I've got a really long list of things that I don't have figured out. But I also am starting to say, all right, who can I find that has those skills? As we were starting to talk about capitalization and things, I went and found a good friend of mine who was a lawyer by background. He'd done a startup before and done the investment side. I needed that guy. He was good at a whole list of things that I wasn't. And I think the same way when you're building a development team, figure out the pieces that you can't do and find good people to fill those. And don't try to do it all yourself, because if you're not naturally gifted at it, you're probably not going to force yourself into it, unwillingly. So
you've got to reach the farmer, you're actually your paying customer to build this out. How do you see, what are your next steps in going about trying to build that
Sure. Yeah, and so if you think about any two-sided market application, which is essentially what we've built, whether you look at Uber and some of these others that are out there, most conventional wisdom would say you've got to be able to kind of focus on one of those sides to kind of drive your marketplace. We certainly think that providing the application to farmers for free will be an incentive for them to use it. And we hope that the farmer will essentially take the 4 or 5 guys that he has on speed dial and put them into AgriSync. That's one of the fundamental bets. But we also are working to develop kind of an outbound or an inside sales marketing approach to reach those advisors and to go to them with the notion of efficiency. And so fortunately I'm familiar with kind of the sales methodology and process of that. So I like to sell software. I like to get up and market it and do the webinars and talk to people about it. And so that's kind of our model around that. We've got a team that we're building out to kind of help with that advisor side. So,
And in your case, if you get a AE or somebody like that, an equipment provider, it's to their benefit to get all their farmers on board. And they have a real incentive. Because every one of those farmers that can use this app saves AE a ton of money and increases revenues.
yeah, I mean, most of these advisors, they want to deliver a great customer service experience. And they want to make it easy for the farmer, and they want to do that in an innovative way. So, we found a few of our beta participants, and the reasons we went to them is they had made a statement about, hey, we want to get really good at customer service. When we see a person who's focused in on it, who's got somebody measuring customer service, caring about it, they're a great candidate for us to pursue.
If you can break them up a little bit, I'm curious, you kind of touched on this. For what position was your first hire, your first partnership? And in reflection, where do you wish you would have brought somebody in
Yeah.
on the project?
Well, the first person that I reached out to for help was my lead developer, and because I wanted to know if this idea or concept could be built. I think if I were rolling back the clock, I would actually, if you have a concept in mind, I would go out and find a great designer first. And I would work with that designer to get a wireframe or a mock-up of your concept. And then I would take that concept to 100 customers, if you can, and say, what do you think? Would this solve a problem? Would you be willing to pay for this? What am I missing? And I think I would err on the side of getting that first person that you ask for help to be somebody who can help you with that design. Because, we started on architecture, on the concept of could it be built. I would argue that there's enough technology on the planet right now. Most things can be built, right? So just put that one to rest. But every day there's a ton of technology that's built that nobody cares about at all. And it's not solving anybody's problem. And so if you've got a concept in mind, you can frame it up very quickly with a designer for a lot less money, get that out and get some feedback on it, and do that 3 or 4 times, and then have all of your requirements set before you actually start writing code. I think the other thing that I was fortunate to do was to recognize early on that things like legal and finance were expensive assets that I was not terribly gifted at, and I was fortunate to have a partner that I reached out to who was very gifted at it, and brought him into the business early, and has been a tremendous asset. And I know some people are like, well, should I get a partner? Should I not? I'm kind of pro-partner. Everybody's like, well, I don't want to get a partner because I've heard that partnerships always end in divorce, right? There's no 2 business partners who are ever buried together with happy, matrimony. That's probably true. But there's also a lot of things when you get started with any company that you could certainly use a partner, and especially if you find the right one who can complement your skills, and hopefully help you, accelerate. So.
Question back there?
Yeah, I'm more confused on how you make money. Maybe make an assumption here. You say that those service providers to reduce their cost of sending out trucks. Really cool. I'm assuming that piece of equipment you're talking about is under warranty. So if it's not under warranty, then is there a paid piece there?
Sure. Yeah, so the question was, how do we monetize, and specifically on the equipment side with warranty? Right now, if I run an ag equipment dealership and I go out and service a piece of equipment that's under warranty, based upon what I'm doing, there's a certain amount of warranty reimbursement that I receive from Case IH or Deere or whoever that company is. And they assume that if it's this job, it's going to take me 2.5 hours, and these are the warranty codes that I enter. All we're doing is giving the dealer the opportunity to potentially do that in a lesser amount of time. So we hope that we will still, again, on warranty work, there is reimbursement coming from typically the mothership, of whoever I service for. If we allow them to service warranty work in a lesser amount of time, they're just that much more cost efficient. Now, we would love at some point that they say, hey, this type of service work, it should all be done remotely. That would be a nice thing. But we essentially charge, again, we provide our service for free to farmers, and then the service providers have the ability to either do a monthly or an annual subscription to our service. And that's how we monetize.
A follow-up question?
Sure.
So is it safe to say that a majority of the equipment out there that the farmers have are under warranty?
It varies. The question was, is it safe to say that all equipment is under warranty? I would say not typically, but the last few years have been pretty good for farmers, so a lot of equipment is under warranty. And we haven't just focused on the notion of warranty. A bigger value prop that we're giving beyond the cost of warranty is the time, and the time for the farmer and the time for the service provider. So if we can take what used to be a 2.5 to 3 hour service window and bring that down to less than 15 minutes, we've hopefully benefited both parties in doing that.
Well, in some cases, somebody's down during planting season or harvest season, the cost of the farmer is so amazingly high. And it may not be 2 or 3 hours, it may be 2 days, because there may not be a truck to send, and everybody may be so busy. So it's also that they deal with this huge peak load problem, where suddenly somebody's literally can't get a truck there until tomorrow. Now they can make a 10-minute video interaction and maybe solve the problem.
The risk that technology providers to the farmers have is that they disengage, right? There's still an on-off button, there's still an unplug button on most of this technology. And in our surveys, a lot of farmers said, hey, if it's going to rain and the difference between me getting this field done is whether I've got it on auto steer or capturing the technology, I still remember how to drive the thing manually. And I'm just going to reach down and unplug it. When that happens, and then the next year I go to try to sell that farmer on the value of whatever that technology was, that's a problem, because in the peak moment they pulled out on me, right? And so part of what we're trying to do is keep the farmer engaged with the technology and reduce frustration. A lot of that has to do with time. So.
All right.
Couple sharing, feature-wise, are you going to build a knowledge base?
Are you going to build a knowledge?
Yeah, the question was, are we going to build a knowledge base? It's a great question. We certainly got asked that by some of our customers. Right now, there's a lot of sensitivity around data privacy in the agriculture space. You might have read about this. Farmers have all this ability to collect data. There's a lot of sensitivity around who they share it with. So for right now, we want the knowledge of what we're doing to be just between the farmer and their advisor that they select. I think, again, we're not doing yield data. We're doing data on how to fix things, right? So generally, most farmers would, if they found a great way to solve something, they would be open to sharing that, especially if it will reduce the frustration. There is some out there, but part of what we asked farmers, we said, hey, do you go to YouTube or some of these places to look? It's not so much, they want to hear it from their local advisor. And so for us, the knowledge repository concept is only valuable if it's coming from a credible local advisor. We're a big believer in the fact that most great advice for farmers comes locally. We don't really subscribe to the notion that they're going to openly take recommendations from some sort of blind approach that's a long ways away. They want some credibility to that. So, but the whole data thing, we try to stay away from that because we're not collecting any data metrics, and there's a ton of great technology in ag right now that is sort of being held up because of the concern over data privacy. Yes?
As you progress, how much do you think your revenue will fall from the customer for fixing problems versus someone, a farmer who wants to educate himself on deeper functionality within the technology?
Well, we think that the long-term revenue model is from the service providers, and their goal in trying to basically better serve that farmer. We are not internally housing. At AgriSync, we're building the highway. We're not, and letting everybody else's trucks, if you will, travel on our support platform. We don't view ourselves as essentially doing direct support to the farmer, meaning we're not trying to become experts on that and sell that as expertise. But we do think there is potentially, especially globally, a market for paid support type solutions, right? All of us as taxpayers in the state of Iowa, if Iowa State University was going to start supporting somebody in Peru or Colombia, we would probably want Iowa State University to get paid for that, right? So that's potentially a long ways down the road. But I do think this notion of a shortage of kind of skilled labor presents the opportunity, if people want to at some point in time, to charge for it. That's been the model in telemedicine. I'm not sure that we can apply that as directly in ag. Maybe I'm a little skeptical, but yes.
See any advertising opportunities or other ways to monetize your interactions with farmers?
It's a good question. The question is, do we see any advertising opportunities? We certainly could have gone down the ad-supported app route, but farmers have a low tolerance for that. We kind of looked at our audience and said, "Nah, I don't think that'll work." I think if they see a banner ad at the bottom for some game, they're going to be like, "Oh, this is, I don't know if I want to get advice from this or not." So part of it's just been our own audience. We could be dead wrong on that. If you talk to the guys in town that are doing some of the gaming tools, I mean, they've done crazy good stuff with ad-supported apps, but given our audience, we don't think that'll be the case. The other interesting thing, Amazon, they had the push button on the Amazon Fire. You could get the person to help you do live support. You probably saw the ads around Christmas. And they had a big problem with people just pushing that button and wanting to talk about their cats or something like that. We don't have that issue with farmers, right? If they push a button, they got a problem or an issue. So,
Big question right here.
yeah.
That Amazon wasn't actually answering my question. I was trying to parallel this, since I'm not an agriculture person, to anything else.
Mhm.
And telemedicine, but I mean, where else, like my MediaCom guy, because my home office might need repair instantly and they're not available till Thursday, and I don't know, where else do you see this? Is there a parallel?
I think you will see other service models go into more visual support approaches. The technology stack that we're using is still relatively new, but I think over time you'll see other customer service models go there. And we've been asked, well, why don't you just do that as a platform? And mainly because we know agriculture and we see an immediate opportunity to solve a vertical problem. And I've been on the horizontal world before, and I know that the horizontal world, as far as platform providers, is typically reserved for a handful of really big companies. And that wasn't really, from a mission standpoint, we wanted to solve some vertical type solutions. But I definitely think you'll see that. You're seeing it already in telemedicine, right? Because you've got telemedicine providers who are specializing in psychiatry or types of telemedicine that are different. So if I want to go see a certain type of doctor, there's telemedicine providers that are now getting into a very vertical approach.
Bernard, do you had a question?
How do you see your exit strategy?
Good question. The question was, how do we see our exit strategy? I think we're still trying to make sure we've got our entry strategy correct. So, That's always a fun question to ask, and I think people who say they have a defined exit strategy as a startup are either a lot smarter than we are or making up an answer. You know, we definitely see that if we would do some nice integrations with the broader ecosystem, that would probably be valuable. But I don't think we're sitting here dreaming up an exit strategy. I've seen some good companies who have gotten so dialed in on an exit strategy that they've almost become hostage to one or two big providers. And it's almost like they're trying to build something just to get bought. And when you start doing that, I question whether or not you lose sight of the business problem you were trying to solve.
I think that works better when you're building a technology set. If you're building a set of technology for the Ethernet world, targeting Cisco as your acquirer from day one may make a lot of sense. But when you're targeting an endpoint solution, especially business to business, it's going to be real obvious you're not solving a problem. Mill, you had a question.
Yeah, talk about the fundraising process.
Yeah.
The timing and what you've learned, what surprised you about it, and maybe some goals that we have there.
Well, I think for us, and I think for any person who wants to raise funds, first, and I think Mike gave me this advice, he said it'll take longer than you think, so start early. And when you think you're completely prepared to start going out and talking to people, you're probably not. So those were two good pieces of advice I got from Mike early on. And one of the things that he did say is, hey, if you want to do a dry run of your pitch, I'll get some smart people in a room and we'll do that. And Milt and Mike and others were kind enough to do that for us, right? We essentially got very constructive feedback on our pitch. And I can't stress enough the importance of that, because I'd come from the world where, you know, at Microsoft we'd go into an hour meeting and talk for 55 minutes and give the customer 5 minutes to say yes or no at the end, and that's not the way you go and pitch your company. And, you know, I was too dependent on PowerPoint, and I rambled, as you probably see today a little bit. So we did, what, 2 or 3 dry run sessions?
2 dry runs, and then we actually did it with angels. So
yeah.
The questions are very legitimate when you realize, it's one thing to put 4 people in a room and say, you know, give me some feedback. It's another when you realize they all 4 can write checks, and that their feedback is relevant. You got some good honest feedback. I mean, that's one of the nice things about being in Iowa. You can't get that done on the coastline. So you will be very challenged to find 2 angels that would take the time to do that for you. And they'll usually want something for it. Nothing against them. It's just a different environment. But we've got some true angels here that actually like to just help. Milt is one of them, by the way.
Well, and I think it helped us not only with our investor pitch, meaning defining our value proposition, but we were better the next time when we got in front of customers about what we were trying to do as well. So doing the dry run pieces, getting all of your kind of due diligence documents together, right? How are you incorporated or LLC'd? What's your financial model? All of your things, if you will, the check boxes that you need to have. That took a lot longer than I think we anticipated. I would also say that we got a little smarter about what type of investment we wanted to take. You know, if you're just looking for sort of generic investment, you could probably go to the East or West Coast and find generic investment pretty easily if you've got a good concept. We looked at it and said we would like people who actually cared about or understood agriculture, you know, who understood our audience. And so we started asking ourselves 4 or 5 questions before we would take a meeting with a investor. We would say, what are the plus factors? Are they going to be able to introduce us to a potential set of customers? Are they connected into our industry? Do they have the ability to write follow-on checks? What type of checks do they write? You know, if they're an investor who only writes $1 million plus checks, and we're not asking for nearly that much, let's not waste their time or ours, you know? And so what I think, and plus, you know, we're in a small community, right? So the community kind of talks about what they're doing. We've made some mistakes too, right? In the fact that we didn't probably pace ourselves through the process as quickly and as efficiently and as communicative as we could have. And so I certainly have a list of things I would have probably done a little differently as far as pace and communication. The best thing I did was made sure that I had in the room with me my partner, who's gone through this process before and understands all the language and the terminology, because that wasn't sort of my strength. But I think if you've got a good concept and you're sincere about it and you're genuine about what you're doing, and you find that you can take some practice runs at a pitch, most angel investors are, they're business champions on their own, right? And they love to see new good ideas and give feedback on that. So I think for me, a lot of the value was just getting feedback. We would get out of a pitch meeting and that person would say, well, you ought to think about this, this, and this. I mean, that's golden when you're building a product or a service, because a lot of times they had ideas about pricing, about marketing, about your team that were blind sides for you. So don't run away from that. I think they're really good opportunities to learn from. But get advice too. Mike helped us kind of timeline out some things that we should do, and the dry run piece was a big win for us.
We're out of time. Thank you all for coming. And you're going to get an email asking for a survey. People don't think I read it. I do want to tell whoever last month suggested I get Bill Gates to speak here next month. I would love to do that. If you have his name and phone number and email address that he'll answer me, I'd be happy to invite Bill Gates. Actually, I think several people we've had recently actually were on the list from some of you who provided feedback, so I appreciate that. Next month, April 15th, Ben Milne will be here. I think we're going to be in the even bigger room for that one. Casey, can you hang around for a few minutes afterwards?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming.
Hang around after this, after the formal's done. If you guys want to talk or whatever, we'll be here for a while. Casey, thank you very much.
Thanks.